All right, everybody, buckle up, because today's deep dive is going to be a wild ride. We're talking about a clash of titans, a real David and Goliath story, except this time, David's packing some serious legal heat. If you think it's just about Fortnite, think again. This is about who controls the future of how we get our apps, how much we pay for them, the whole shebang.
Yeah, it's way bigger than just one game, that's for sure. We're talking billions of dollars, accusations of monopolies being thrown around left and right. Even governments are getting involved.
Here. So to break it down for us, we've got expert speaker name, our resident tech guru.
Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure, especially when we're diving into a topic this juicy. So, before we get into the nitty-gritty, can you give us the 30-second elevator pitch? What's the big picture here?
Sure, so basically you've got Epic Games, the company behind the massively popular game Fortnite, going head-to-head with Apple and Google, the giants of the App Store world. And the heart of the issue, control. Epic's saying that Apple and Google are running their app stores like a dictatorship, charging outrageous fees and stifling competition.
Okay, outrageous fees, we got to dig into that. But first, before we get to the main event, the Apple and Google showdown, Epic picked a smaller fight with Samsung, right?
Yeah, they kind of tested the waters with a lawsuit against Samsung over something called the auto blocker.
Now, I vaguely remember this, but refresh our memory. What exactly is the auto blocker?
Well, it's this feature on certain Samsung devices that makes it incredibly difficult to download apps from anywhere other than the Google Play Store.
So basically, if you wanted to download Fortnite directly from Epic's website, Samsung's making it a real pain in the you-know-what.
Exactly. And Epic's argument is that this auto blocker, while Samsung claims it's all about security, is actually about steering people towards their app store.
So they get a cut of the pie.
Right, because when you download through the Google Play Store, Samsung gets a piece of those in-app purchases.
Sneaky, sneaky. But Epic's point is, hey, we're not some random app developer, we're Fortnite.
Exactly. They've even collaborated with Samsung in the past, made special Fortnite skins for Samsung devices, so they have a point.
It's like, you know us, we're not going to hit you with some shady malware.
Exactly. And this whole thing really highlights the tension that exists between these tech giants who want to control everything, and, well, the companies who want a more open, competitive playing field.
And that tension, my friends, is at the very core of Epic's battle with Apple and Google, which, believe me, gets even juicier. I mean, we're talking lawsuits totaling billions of dollars, accusations of monopolies flying left and right. And right at the heart of it, this 30% cut that Apple and Google take from app sales, it's enough to make anyone's blood boil.
30%, it's a big chunk of change.
Right, especially when you consider that many app developers or small businesses or individuals just trying to get their ideas out there.
And it's not just the apps themselves, right? It's the in-app purchases, too, like that extra life in a game or subscribing to Spotify. That 30% cut, it adds up.
Okay, so break it down for us. Why exactly is this 30% cut so controversial? I mean, I get it. It seems like a lot, but is it really that big of a deal?
Oh, it's a huge deal, and here's why. Imagine you're a developer, right? You pour your heart and soul into creating an amazing app. You're finally ready to share it with the world, and then bam, your boss swoops in and says, hey, just gonna take a third of your paycheck? Cool. That's essentially what's happening here.
But it's not just about the money either, is it? It stifles competition, right?
Absolutely. It creates a massive barrier to entry for smaller developers. It's like trying to compete with Amazon while they're running their business at a 30% discount. It's nearly impossible.
So Epic's not just fighting for a bigger slice of the pie, they're fighting for a whole new pie altogether.
Exactly. They want a fundamental change in how these app stores operate, more choice for developers, and ultimately more choice and potentially lower prices for consumers.
Music to my ears.
Yeah.
In this UK lawsuit, they really hone in on how those restrictions impact us, the users, right?
Right. And one of their big arguments is that because Apple and Google control the App Store market, we're stuck with limited choices and potentially higher prices. It's like only having one grocery store in town, you're at their mercy.
So basically, Epic is saying, hey, this isn't just about us, it's about everyone who uses a smartphone.
Exactly. They're trying to make it a consumer issue, not just a developer issue.
Smart move. But if these restrictions are so blatant, how are Apple and Google getting away with it? What's their defense?
Well, their main argument revolves around security and user experience. They say that by having strict control over their app stores, they're able to create a walled garden, a safe and curated environment free from buggy or potentially harmful apps.
So it's that classic trade-off. convenience and security versus freedom and potentially lower prices.
Exactly. And it's a trade-off that a lot of people are willing to make. But the question is it a trade-off that we should have to make?
Oh, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's a question that the courts are starting to grapple with, which brings us to the really interesting part of this whole saga, the legal battle.
Obviously.
And trust me, things get wild. We're talking massive wins, devastating losses, and plot twists you won't see coming. But to hear about all that, you'll have to wait for part 2 of this deep dive. Okay, so last time we left off with this big question. Is this trade-off, this walled garden approach that Apple and Google are so proud of, is it actually justified?
Yeah, that's the billion-dollar question. And honestly, the courts are starting to wonder the same thing. One of the biggest bombshells in this whole saga was the U.S. case against Google.
Oh yeah, that was huge. I remember when that verdict came down, the tech world practically exploded.
It was massive. A jury actually ruled that Google, through its Play Store, was operating a monopoly.
A monopoly, wow, that's not something you hear every day, especially when it comes to a tech giant like Google.
It's a really big deal because it sets a precedent. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. The court found that Google used its dominance to stifle competition, and that's a big no-no.
So what does that actually mean for Google? Are they going to have to make changes to their Play Store?
Potentially, yeah, this ruling could force them to allow alternative payment systems within apps, which would be a game changer. It could also make it easier for other app stores to compete with Google Play, and who knows, maybe even force them to rethink that 30% cut.
Wow, so this is a major victory for Epic Games, and maybe for all of us who use apps.
It could be huge, but we gotta remember, legal battles are a marathon, not a sprint, and Google has already appealed the ruling.
So we're not going to see these changes overnight.
Probably not. But the fact that a jury sided with Epic is massive. It sets a precedent and emboldens other developers to challenge the status quo, to say, hey, these tech giants aren't invincible.
Yeah, it's like they poked a hole in that walled garden we were talking about. And speaking of poking holes, Epic's also appealing the Apple ruling, right? What's the latest on that front?
Oh, it's getting interesting. They've got some serious heavy hitters in their corner this time around.
Like who? Spill the tea.
We're talking 35 U.S. states, Microsoft, even the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is a major digital rights group.
Whoa, that's a lot of firepower. What are they arguing?
They've all filed briefs supporting Epic's appeal, and their argument boils down to this. Apple's iron grip on the App Store, it's bad for competition, it's bad for developers, and ultimately, it's bad for consumers.
It's really becoming less about Epic versus Apple and more about a whole movement pushing back against the power of big tech.
Absolutely, and that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating, so important. It's not just about one game or one company trying to make a buck. It's about the future of how we use technology, how we interact with our devices.
It's a question of control, isn't it? Who gets to decide what apps we have access to, how much we pay for them, how our digital lives are shaped?
Exactly. Do we want to live in a world where a handful of powerful corporations call all the shots? Or do we want a more open, more competitive market where consumers have genuine choices?
That's a question we all have to ask ourselves. And believe me, the answers are far from simple. But to really understand the stakes, to grasp the potential consequences of this battle, we need to dig a little deeper. So join us for the thrilling conclusion of this deep dive, where we'll explore what a post-walled garden world might look like. Will it be a utopia of innovation and lower prices, or will it be a wild west of security risks and fragmented experiences? Find out in part 3. All right, so we've talked about the lawsuits, the arguments, the potential fallout, but let's get down to brass tacks here. What does all this actually mean for the everyday person scrolling through their phone?
It's about impact, right? Like, this isn't some abstract tech legal battle happening in a vacuum. This stuff determines what apps we can even get on our phones, how much we got to shell out for them, even how much control we have over these little devices we practically sleep with.
Yeah, no more doom scrolling at 3 a.m. if the App Store police say so.
Right, exactly. It boils down to a simple but huge question. Who gets to call the shots in our digital lives? Is it going to be a handful of powerful corporations, or is it going to be us, the users, the ones actually using these apps?
Okay, but let's play devil's advocate for a second. Let's say Epic wins this whole thing, those walled gardens crumble, everyone celebrates. Does that automatically mean it's sunshine and roses for us? More choice, lower prices, apps raining from the sky?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And honestly, there's no guarantee either way. Epic, obviously, they're arguing that breaking Apple and Google's stranglehold is going to unlock this golden age of app development. More innovation, more competition, which in theory should mean better apps and lower prices for users.
That was pretty good to me.
Right. But on the flip side, there are some valid concerns about what happens when you loosen the reins too much.
Like what? Give us the worst case scenario.
Think back to the early days of the internet, the Wild West, anything goes. You had a lot more freedom, sure, but you also had a lot more scams, security risks, just a general sense of like, am I going to get hacked if I click this link?
Okay, yeah. I'm getting some flashbacks to some
Yeah.
questionable downloads back in the day.
Right, and that's what some people worry about with the app stores, that without these gatekeepers, things could get a little, well, chaotic.
So it's a balancing act, isn't it?
It always is with technology, finding that sweet spot between innovation, affordability, and user experience. It's tough.
Yeah, nobody wants to trade a walled garden for a digital minefield.
Exactly, and that's why this whole conversation is so important. We got to keep talking about it.
And that's what we're all about here on the Deep Dive, right? Getting those conversations started, making sure people understand the stakes.
Totally. Because at the end of the day, whether you're on Team Epic or Team Apple, the fact that we're having this debate at all is a good thing.
It means we're not just passively accepting the status quo. We're questioning the power dynamics at play and saying, hey, we have a say in this.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And on that note, a huge thank you to expert speaker name for breaking down this complex issue with us.
Always a pleasure.
And to all of you listening, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the battle for the soul of the App Store. It's a battle that's far from over and one that we'll be following closely here at the Deep Dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep those devices safe.